The valley holds its breath as dusk bruises the sky, and a tigress stands over the cooling body of her mate. His stripes seem to sink into the earth, as if the soil were learning his pattern to remember him by air thick with wet leaf and iron. She inhales once, twice. Then sound erupts from her chest, a low, primal note that lifts like a flare into the monsoon dark. It rolls through bamboo and ravine, startles Chital into a scatter of hooves, sets langurs silent and owls awake. Far off, a human pauses, radio crackling. Nearer, a rusted wire hums faintly in the aftershock. The call isn't only grief. It is a perimeter drawn in sound, a declaration that the world has changed, and everything must move or be moved. On the valley's skin, water bids and quivers. On the ridge, clouds lean in to listen, and somewhere in the tangle of thorn and track, the echo finds ears that should be here, and refuses to let them forget. Silence spreads like ink, and the forest recalibrates. Bats stitch the air above the clearing, and somewhere a peacock offers a ragged question, unanswered. Shira lowers her head and noses the ruff that once rose like fire over Rudra's shoulders. The scent is already thinner, laced with wet soil and a human trace that sours her tongue. She steps a slow circle, tracing memory into the mud. The trail they patrolled, the termite mound they marked, the reed bed where fish flashed like coins. The call she made is not finished. It lingers in her ribs, the ache of a boundary redrawn, a map with one light gone out. On the slope below, a radio murmurs, then stills. Night is a weight she knows how to carry, but tonight it slides differently, unbalanced, every shadow keen-edged. She lifts her head again. The valley shifts with her, a compass needle twitching toward whatever comes next. Downstream, the river remembers every footfall. It braids the day's alarms into eddies that push and pull at roots, tucking secrets beneath stones. A kingfisher's arc writes a bright slash across the dimming water, then vanishes into reeds that conceal a coil of wire no plant could have grown. The scent of man lingers there, oil, tobacco, the iron tang of blood, and a scrap of cloth yawns on a twig like a tired mouth. Shira lifts the air and feels the old geometry shift. Trails she and Rudra knew as arteries now pulse with unfamiliar beats. She tests the bank, pad setting down where his weight once made the mud honest, and the river offers back a stuttering echo. Far off, something metallic ticks as it cools. The valley's rooms are all occupied tonight, and not all by rightful tenants. Her shoulders lower, her breath goes thin. She becomes a shadow that decides its own depth. On the ridge, a torch blinks twice, then hides. The forest answers with a chorus that isn't birdsong. Generator zipper. The whisper of plastic stretched too tight. Anya freezes, knees damp in fern rot, breath counting to 6, then 6 again. She notes the echo's path on a weatherproof pad, but it's her ribs that memorize it, the way the sound passed through her like a slow blade. She has measured tiger scat, cast pug marks in plaster, argued budgets in rooms that smelled like air conditioning, not rain. But this note, this sound of a world suddenly missing a pillar, Rue writes her job description in the fine print of her bones. She closes her eyes and sees corridors on a map collapsing like bridges in flood. Twice more the torch blinks. She lifts her radio, then doesn't. There is a grammar to the night, and she will not split it with noise. Back at the clearing, clouds belly low until they nearly touch the trees, and rain adjusts from curtain to beads. Shira licks her mate's brow once, a ritual that means nothing to the dead and everything to the living, then steps away as if backing out of a doorway that won't open again. She drags her whiskers through a spray of grass to clear the scent, tastes air as if it were a map with new legends. Somewhere between hill and hollow, a boar tests the margins. Somewhere else, a man tallies courage against consequence. The call inside her wants out again, but she saves it, coiling it like a rope. Territory is a verb now, an action with teeth. She glides into the seam where trunks cluster, disappearing seam by seam until grief becomes movement, and movement becomes a vow the forest will have to honor. Morning arrives reluctant and silver, as if the sun were testing the forest's patience. On the ridge, two figures move with the grammar of old habit, one reading the ground like a borrowed diary, the other listening to the canopy for the punctuation of alarm. They find a scuff on a boulder where wet fur brushed, a single hollow in the mud where a heavy chest rested and then refused to breathe again. Threads of wire marks appear in places no vine would choose, and here and there the print of a boot heel interrupts the script of hooves. Maps unfold on a knee, clipped to a board slick with mist. Lines that once promised passage now end in cul-de-sacs of maze and tin roofs shine. The valley narrows not only in acres but in options, corridors squeezed until even sound must turn sideways to pass. A plan takes shape, unglamorous as rain. Pull wire, reset cameras, ask questions no one once recorded. The cat moves as if the forest were a coat she is shrugging into, each muscle like practice stitch. Grief has scoured her edges bright, but the work remains. Remark borders dulled by rain. Test the currents where human scent braided itself into water. She rakes a tree not for fury but for memory, leaving resin bright as sunrise on the cut. Small lives adjust around her. Mina scolds. A hair freezes into belief. Cicadas raise their chanting ceiling. In the reeds, fish stitch silver into green. Beyond them, a clearing shows the geometry of trespass, straight lines, right angles. A logic alien to vine and fang. She pauses at a place where the air tasted metal last night, tongue curled to read the old alphabet of threat. The world is louder in absence. Even mud remembers different when a heavy step is missing. She swallows the ache and lets distance become a tour. Down in the village's outer ring where the road loses its patience and becomes mud, a man counts reasons like scars. The goats are thinner this season. Grain rots when the rain forgets how to stop. A child coughs through the night with a sound that coins do not soothe. He did not set out to learn the forest's weak points, but hunger tutors hard and fast. Metal fits in a pocket, wire coils flat beneath a shirt. Buyers speak in numbers and promises that feel like rope and rescue at once. He tells himself the cats have plenty of valley left, that a single life is a fair price for medicine, that the people with clipboards and radios will not miss what they never truly own. The thought moves like a snake under tin. It sounds louder than it is. It is more dangerous than it sounds. He hears the echo that rolled last night and pretends it was thunder. The river thins into a braid of clear threads where boulders shoulder the current aside. Here the forest tells the truth easily. Otter slides veer away from a place where stones sit too neatly. A kingfisher's perch overlooks a patch of grass bowed by many cautious feet. A hand parts sedge and finds the polite cruelty of a snare, anchored to a root torn raw. The metal bites even the glove. One breath, two, and then the muttered arithmetic of distance to road. Road to truck, truck to market. The wire comes free with a quiet that feels wrong. A camera goes up, its black eye aimed where shadow will pass at dusk. There is a way to talk to a valley without words. Rearrange what can be rearranged. Refuse to let the harmful geometry stand. Across the water, a drag mark angles into scrub and vanishes, as if ashamed of where it leads. Night returns with a different script, written in infrared and patience. The forest's clock hands are animals, and each ticks past in its proper hour. Civet, porcupine, a herd of deer pretending to be wet. The camera blinks its red pinprick into the dark, counting silently. Somewhere higher up, a breath tests the wind, and the wind pushes back. Radios stay quiet unless they must not. Between roots, the earth keeps archives. A heel edge, a tread crosshatch, the smear of a hurried turn. The echo from yesterday seems to have traveled into objects. Leaves shiver when nothing touches them. Bamboo clicks like a tongue clicking at a lie. The waiting is a sieve. Fear and resolve are poured through until only one remains. When the thunderheads lift, The stars look like nails hammered into black plank. Something will hang from them before dawn. Truth or another absence. Morning breaks as a negotiation no one agreed to. In the Panchayat courtyard, tarps flap like stubborn flags and the smell of boiled tea competes with damp hay and diesel. Questions stack higher than the plastic chairs. Who will pay for the buffalo taken last month? Who will stop the raids that come like weather? Who will fix the fence that is both a promise and a dare? The biologist spreads maps that look like riddles, corridors, choke points, red dots that mean cameras or trouble. And the tracker watches faces the way he reads pug marks, noting where fear widens and where anger narrows. A few men stand apart, wires coiled like bracelets beneath long shirts, listening for words that might become permission. The forest officer arrives late and with a practiced shrug for budgets and laws. When the biologist mentions the echo that rolled through the valley 2 nights ago, the courtyard stills, just for a breath, as if the sound has reached them last. In the back room of a shuttered shop that smells of jaggery and rust, a man learns the price of quiet. The buyer is a shape with a ledger, his words oiled, his smile an adding machine. The numbers laid down are small until they are large. The penalties for refusal are never named, only tallied in silences that flutter like trapped moths. The man pictures the cough wringing the child thin, the crop drowned twice, then scorched once, the debt ledger that bleeds through every page. He tells himself he is only borrowing from the forest, that he will repay with care later, that he knows where metal sings already. The ledgerman slides a packet across the counter, and an address scribbled like a snake. This is the moment the valley narrows around a single choice, and he is too tired to notice. Outside, rain rehearses its alibi on the tin roof, steady as coins. The forest department compound is a museum of decisions postponed. Tar drums, cracked helmets, a radio mast that leans like an exhausted sentinel. In a room with maps yellowing at the corners, authority wears a crisp shirt and a calendar face, eyes already looking past the conversation toward lunch or tomorrow. The biologist lays out the wire, evidence turned into geometry. Here, here, and here. The tracker adds the smell of oil and tobacco at the ford, the drag mark that lost its nerve mid-scrub. There are nods, then paperwork breeds paperwork. Someone suggests a meeting about meetings. The clock's second hand sighs its way around. She names the sound that rolled across the valley as a casualty and a warning. The officer writes the word incident with a slow pen. Outside, monkeys raid a mango tree with more coordination than policy can muster. Before leaving, she pockets the smallest coil of wire. A reminder that patience alone is not a plan. At the village edge, a procession of grievances walks itself in circles. Women speak of fields raided into lace, of nights spent banging pots until their palms bruised. Elders recall a time when the forest felt farther away, even when it stood at the doorstep. The biologist listens until silence arrives, then names compensation forms that dissolve on contact with rain, names fences that guide animals like gutters guide water. She offers a corridor on the map like a truce line, and the room unfolds and folds again. Hope, doubt, arithmetic. A boy asks if the cats know how to read. Laughter unknots a few shoulders. Then someone mentions a rumor of meat sold cheap last week, and the laughter snaps shut. The tracker watches the rumor move through the crowd like fire finding resin. He marks 3 faces by how they won't look at the ground. Outside, the sky holds off rain the way a man holds off truth. Dusk fits the valley like a lock finally meeting its key. The tigress moves a boundary with her body, rewriting lines in scent and claw, passing the place where metal once waited with the careful contempt of a survivor. The biologist and tracker ghost the ridge above, careful feet placing faith in damp bark, an old habit. In the gully below, the man who took the packet tests a loop with a stick, then a heavier stick, then a prayer he pretends not to say. A goat bell rings somewhere it shouldn't. The wind chooses a side and carries it for a breath. All three paths align, the cat's low glide. The watchers held air, the poacher's hand half open over a wire that gleams like a lie. It is not yet collision. It is the moment before, when the world inhales and remembers it has teeth. Fireflies light their tiny parliaments. The first frog calls time. The valley tightens to a blade. Day's last color drains into the sal groves, and sound rearranges itself into warnings. Drongo clicks, stitched to alarm, bamboo knocking like wooden hearts. Shira lowers herself until grass forgets her outline. Grief distilled into purpose as clean as rain caught in a leaf. She follows the ghost line where human scent snagged last night, the air tasting of oil and damp rope. On a ridge paralleling her arc, two human shadows match her patience, Enya counting beats between bird calls, Babu filing the wind's small reports. In the gully ahead, there is a geometry that does not belong. Wire faint as spider silk, a stake bitten into earth, bait hung like a bad promise. The hunt is not only for meat now, it is for a question with teeth. Who tells a valley what its future is? The monsoon mutters under its breath. Lightning veins a far cloud like a map postponed. Night arrives with its toolbox. Fog to soften distances, crickets to smudge edges, a moon hiding behind cloud like a coin under a thumb. Shira ghosts the contour, setting each paw where leaf memory will forgive her. The metal scent fattens. Somewhere ahead a match flares, a brief pupil of fire in a human eye. Anya feels the tug in her ribs, the echoes afterglow guiding her like a buried magnet, and signals with one slow hand, a language older than her job. Babu reads the mud as if it's still speaking, finds an old heel print renewed by haste, a path that thinks it is secret. A boar detonates from a thicket, dragging the forest's attention with it, and in the brief vacuum Shira advances 3 silent heartbeats. The gully opens like a mouth. She tastes wire on the wind, and behind it fear, and behind that the dull brass of need. The hunt becomes a negotiation with darkness. There is a moment when prey and predator agree to pretend to be geography. Shira becomes slope and shadow. The men ahead become stones arranged too deliberately. Karthik's breath finds a metronome not his own, borrowed from fear. Beside him, another pair of hands, older, ringed with soot, threads wire through a loop with the skittish tenderness of someone diffusing their own life. Enya, belly to wet leaf, sights a camera's black eye at the snare line. Babu's palm rests on soil, counting tremors. The valley listens, deciding who is fluent. A moth mistakes Karthik's ear for a flower and startles him into a clink of metal. Shira freezes a statue court appointed by darkness. The wind tilts, bringing her the shape of a decision. There are hunts that end with blood, and hunts that end with proof. She moves not at the throat, but at the shape that holds the throat in place. The line, the loop, the hand that tightens both. Thunder finds its timing. A sheet of white rips the sky, and, for a breath, everyone becomes a photograph of themselves, guilty, intent, prepared. When darkness stitches back, the forest moves 3 steps forward. Shira breaks cover with a sound low as ground shifting, not a roar, but its outline. Karthik jerks, the loop snatching his wrist, pain snapping him into honesty. The older man lunges for the anchor stake. Babu is already there, boot en route, voice a soft iron. Anya's radio clicks as if it too has a heartbeat. This is the corridor's court, and judgment is written in mud. Prince over prince, boot on wire, paw on earth. Karthik's eyes find the cat's and understand the arithmetic of scale. He freezes, not noble, just newly aware of how much air costs. Shira's whiskers taste the panic sparking the night. She stops 1 pace short of catastrophe and places her body between wire and future. Rain decides to fall properly, drumming the argument flat. The forest officer will arrive late to this page, but the page is already signed. Enya speaks low, words measured to keep fear from breeding in the spaces between them. Baba's knife works the loop free, without cutting skin or mercy. Karthik shakes like a tree in wind, not from courage's absence but from its overdue arrival. The accomplice chooses flight, stumbling into a curtain of bamboo that closes as if it never met him. Shira holds, a presence that edits everyone's choices. When the wire finally coils small in Enya's fist, the cat's breath eases and she slides back into the script that fits her bones. The gully exhales. Somewhere uphill, a sandbar declares the verdict in one flat trumpet. What remains is not triumph but a recalibrated pulse. The valley's beat, restored if not healed, promising a dawn with fewer traps waiting to learn a tiger's name. Dawn comes as steam lifting from bruised earth, revealing the mess that courage leaves behind. The gully wears footprints like fresh handwriting, cut wire gleams among leaf ribs, a pair of sandals sits where someone outran his judgment. The forest breathes differently, shallow but alive. The tracker's inventory silence, checking the edges where noise usually pools. A radio coughs itself into orders that have traveled too far to remain sharp. Across the ridge, smoke unspools. No campfire, no kitchen, just a thin idea of flame testing its grammar on dry bamboo. Lightning last night wrote its signature somewhere uphill. The valley is a tinderbox disguised as green. Plans rearrange themselves. Routes to water, calls to the outpost, the ugly arithmetic of fuel and wind. The cat's trail arcs toward the smoke line as if pulled by an old duty. Grief found purpose. Now purpose finds hazard. Everyone steps lighter, as if the forest were deciding who to keep. By midday, the smoke collects itself into ambition. Wind tilts and a tinder of fallen calms turns whisper into language. Flame shows teeth along a narrow ridge, licking resin, an old leaf, like an inheritance. The biologist counts choke points where fire will become corridor, then highway. The tracker reads rock as refuge and trap both. The tigress watches from shade, pupils thin, calculating angles of heat, the way she once measured distance to prey. Villagers arrive with branches and fear. A rusted water tanker hobbles up, panting. Somewhere in this fumbling orchestra, the man with wire on his conscience stares at the smoke and sees a bill come due. The wind steps harder. Embers jump like decisions made too quickly. A broad leaf ignites with a sigh that sounds like surrender. Choices harden into tools. Beaters, shovels, warnings shouted across gullies. The cat chooses motion, taking the fire line as boundary and obligation at once. Heat folds sound into a tight fist. The canopy pops like knuckles. Ash begins to write gray vowels on everyone's skin. The fire's front splits, a clever fox becoming two, sending one tongue downslope toward the riverbeds and another toward a salt lick scored with old claw. The tracker's line of beaters stutters where rock gives way to thorns. A sapling explodes, flinging sparks that seize a thatch stack behind a cowshed a valley away. The radio stammers, overwhelmed by nouns. East flank, jump spot, cut line. Through the shimmer, an axis of movement emerges, the cat pacing the fire's shoulder, her body a metronome keeping time with danger, while the man who once tightened loops loosens himself from fear and runs with buckets until his legs forget debt. The biologist chooses the harder gully, the one with rotten bamboo and a rumor of trapped fawn. The tracker follows, breath measured, decisions heavier than ash. In the gully, the rumor has a heartbeat. A fawn wedged between roots bleats in ragged bursts, eyes huge coins in a pocket of smoke. Fire presses its suit along the ridge above, emissaries of cinder testing fern tips. The biologist's mind splits. Save the animal or hold the line. The tracker solves the math with his body, sliding into mud to wedge a boot where the roots give, levering space for panic to choose escape. The fawn kicks past with a ricochet of terror. A gust turns the gully into a chimney. Smoke knifes low, making thought a chore. The cat appears at the lip. Impossible. Inevitable. Reading the choke point the way water does. Heat throws a hand on everyone's back. The world narrows to 3 verbs: lift, drag, breathe. In that furnace of now, the man with debts arrives, wordless, shoulders under a sloshing drum, adding water where his guilt cannot reach. Evening bruises the sky, and the fire, starved of wind and fuel, begins to sulk. What remains is the perimeter, a necklace of heat that will turn treacherous if left uncharmed. People become dots along the ridge, beating, scraping, watching for the treason of a single spark. The cat settles near a stone that remembers old sun, eyes half-lidded, chest steady in a rhythm the valley tries to mimic. The fawn has vanished into its birthright of running. The man with wire on his hands sits hard and empty, ash-laced tears making clean tracks he will pretend are sweat. The biologist and tracker walk the line until boots think they are roots, until the smoke finally thins into evening cooking fires and wet earth again. The valley's pulse evens. No one calls it victory, only reprieve. In the hour when birds argue about roosts, a cool wind lifts and carries away a ghost of char that smells almost like rain. The morning after the fire feels like a ledger open to the damages page. Ash turns puddles into ink. Birds test their voices like instruments after a long silence. Anya walks the black seam with Babu, counting what didn't burn and what did. Nest bowl cindered into delicate charcoal. A porcupine quill fused to resin. A sapling, blistered but alive. Karthik trails at a distance, the wire he once carried replaced by a coil of guilt that keeps finding his throat. He speaks finally, not in confession's flourish but in maintenance language. Where snares likely hide, which gullies the traders prefer, who takes cash and who takes meat. Every sentence is a toll pay. Shira ghosts the slope above them, her outline a quiet metronome keeping tempo for the valley's slow rebuild. Grief is still in the room, but now it has work, pulling harm from roots, returning pathways to their original arguments. Paperwork arrives like a second weather system. In the outpost office, the air tastes of stamp ink and reheated tea. The forest officer reads from a book of penalties as if gravity were his invention. Anya's words turn evidence into a route map, where loops were set, how many, which paths animals favor, how the echo of a death aligned the clues. Babu adds the field's grammar, smells, scuffs, the feel under a palm when a place is wrong. Karthik signs a statement with a hand that shakes less than expected. He names the buyer and the day rate that made hunger cheaper than mercy. Consequences stack. A court date, a community meeting, a promise to work the fire line until the rains finish their repair. It is not absolution. It is an installment plan. Outside, smoke thins to memory. Inside, the future learns to sit uncomfortably in the same chair as the past. At noon, heat irons the valley flat. Shira works the northern boundary where fields pretend to be forest. A barbed fence hums with sun and the arithmetic of loss. She could circle wide, but her old patrol with Rudra threaded this seam like a prayer, and habit is a loyal, dangerous friend. She tests a gap that smells of goat and diesel, and barbs find her forepaw with the blind certainty of made things. The pain is quick, persuasive. Blood beads like rubies on orange. She withdraws, anger flaring and then resolving into the cooler labor of survival. Clean in the wound, choose shade, reduce risk. From a copse, Anya sees the stumble, feels that same small tilt in her own stride, and decides against pursuit. Intervention can be cruelty when panic pushes a cat toward worse geometry. The valley keeps its counsel, and both female bodies, human and tigress, recalculate their afternoons around a cost paid in skin. The afternoon stretches thin until a shout knots it. Balbu, methodical as always, works a snare half buried in leaf mold, but the anchor root is young and treacherous. It snaps, recoiling the loop with malicious cheer into his forearm. Pain lights his face, then fades into the practiced quiet of someone who has met worse. Anya is there in 3 strides, knife held like a word, best spoken once. She frees flesh from wire, binds with a strip torn from her own sleeve, and looks at the coil as if it were a question about who gets to live here. Karthik arrives winded, eyes wide with the recognition of harm he once helped set. He takes the wire without being asked, and begins a pile that will become a bonfire of apologies. The cost is not just blood, it's the time the valley loses every time a hand has to unmake what another hand made. Evening folds the valley back into itself. They carry the wire to the river bend, where reflection has a way of enlarging truth, and stack it like a small, ugly monument. Anya lights it with a match that hesitates, then commits. The metal complains as it softens, then gives up geometry altogether. Babu watches with the stillness of an oath being notarized by night. Karthik says nothing, but when the flames lower, he asks to walk the line tomorrow, to learn the patrol's alphabet from the beginning. Up on the ridge, Shira limps to a rock still warm from the long sun and cleans her paw with the efficiency of a surgeon who takes payment in silence. The echo from the first night returns, not as roar but as a low resonance in everyone's bones, a reminder that every future purchased here carries a tax. The river receives the sky's first stars and keeps them safe for morning. Morning unspools like a careful apology, light sliding along wet leaves, as if returning borrowed brightness. The valley smells of quenched ash and green sap, an inventory of what survived. Shira rises from rock-warmed sleep and tests her healing paw, a measured press that redraws pain from sentence to accent. Downridge, Anya and Babu begin a new grammar. Posts for a living fence made of thorn and native vine. A guide that nudges animals toward old paths and people toward patience. Karthik works without commentary, shoulders bent to a task that refuses drama. Dig, tamp, lash. Every so often he glances at the river as though expecting judgment in its glass. The echo from that first night still lives somewhere under ribs, but now it is a bass note under melody. The calls of returning birds, the hush of bamboo relearning wind. Loss remains, yes, but the valley has chosen a verb, to carry. Midday brings a convoy of promises, a ranger truck with a dented door, sacks of saplings, a roll of signs whose words try to balance fear and invitation. Bureaucracy arrives in the shape of forms that must be signed under a people's shade. For once, pens move briskly, ink drying before doubt can catch it. Anya lays out a corridor like a stitch between two wounds, the ridge stream to the western meadow, and people see it not as a line on paper but as a path their feet already know. Babu shows children how to read the forest's margins, where hoofprints feather at speed, where languor's alarms bend around a presence. Karthik answers questions he would have avoided a week ago, naming prices and routes, collapsing rumor into evidence. Above them, Shira ghosts the new seam, pausing at a fresh water hole, as dragonflies learn a prayer of bright wings. The day's heat softens into resolve. Afternoon leans into a quiet that feels earned. In the shade of a bamboo stand, Anya reviews the trap camera's memory, frames flicking like pulse beats. Porcupine civet, a deer's startled hip, then Shira, crossing the gully where Rudra fell, her gait measured, her paw lighter, but true. The sight lands in Anya's chest with complex weight, relief braided to grief, purpose to fatigue. She thinks of the echo as a baton past mid-run, some futures arriving out of breath. Babu sits nearby, binding his forearm with cleaner gauze, and a joke about wire losing its appetite. Karthik brings tea that tastes of smoke and cardamom and apologies that are learning new shapes. In the final clip, a cloud bank opens, a stray shaft of sun crowning the ridge the way memory sometimes crowns pain. The camera blinks its red eye again, dutiful, and Anya files the moment where she keeps her reasons. Toward evening, the valley rehearses a different echo. From the ridge where Rudra's body once cooled, Shira lifts her head and calls, not the shattering note of loss, but a lower, traveling sound. A declaration without despair. It moves through the corridors they repaired, strikes signs still smelling of paint, drapes itself over a field where goats huddle closer to fences built from vines. People stop speaking mid-sentence and listen, because listening is now part of the work. Anya hears it as both report and benediction. Babu counts the seconds it takes to bounce from slope to slope, charting the valley's new geometry by ear. Karthik closes his eyes, measuring the distance between who he was and who he might yet deserve to be. The call settles, absorbed by trunks, by stone, by water and leaves, behind a residue of readiness. When wind arrives, it carries cool. When silence returns, it feels like space. Night returns with its tougher questions and, this time, a few honest answers. Stars perch where smoke once argued. The river keeps a ledger of reflected lights and finds the sum forgiving. Anya writes a final note in the dark. Not a victory report, just coordinates and verbs. Listened, removed, stitched, taught. Babu's slow laughter drifts from the fire as he tells children the story of how wire can forget its shape. Karthik lingers at the edge, then steps into the circle and asks about tomorrow's patrol, and the day after, and the small chores that make big promises credible. On the ridge, Shira settles her body along the earth like a seal placed back into a jar, aligned with the valley's grain. She sleeps, not as escape, but as consent to mourning. The echo that began with death has become a carrying tone, a pitch the valley can tune to when it must remember what it refuses to lose.